The audio grind.
Now then, everyone, welcome back to the Audio Grind episode 6. We're going to be continuing to talk about the chain of guitar recording today. Because the last episode came to a little bit of an abrupt end, didn't it, when we were halfway through talking about pickups?
Yeah.
So we were halfway through chatting about, like, basically what makes a good pickup, what makes a bad pickup. The reason why we had to cut the episode so sort of, like, short in such a weird place is because of your internet, isn't it?
Yeah, mate, absolutely fucking terrible internet. And I think we were just swamped by a myriad of technical issues for the last two dates we were supposed to release, like GoPros overheating, SD cards being full, and just a load of bullshit, really. But yeah, we're back.
It's the trials and tribulations of being an amateur podcaster and not having crew to do stuff for you. And obviously you being out in the Tuscan hills don't exactly do you many favours, does it? It's not too bad where I am, but we're going to do what we're going to do. So we're going to go straight back in, yeah?
Yep.
I believe the very last part of the last episode, I sort of left it on like a bit of a cliffhanger, like dun dun dun. However, ja, doom doom ga doom do 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 do. So yeah, I was basically sort of saying, really, all a pickup is like kind of something that imparts its own EQ curve onto a guitar sound. You know, providing it can hit the front end of the amplifier hot enough. On paper, really, there shouldn't be such thing as a bad pickup. There should just be different pickups. It's the same way, like, you know, a microphone will impart its own sort of, like, characteristics in terms of frequency response, dynamic response. Much the same thing with a pickup. I ended the episode by saying, however, I have played bad pickups. And if you did watch the last episode, you will have heard us talk about our good friend Craig Jackson over at Axesrus, who I work with regularly, well, very regularly, every day pretty much. And he is going to give us some insight as to why there is such thing as a bad pickup. So bear with us. This may be laborious, but it might be a nice little nugget of information to anybody out there who is interested in pickups.
Is it actually just a nugget of information, or is it like a fucking, like, a boulder of information? Because knowing Craig, like, you know, you ask him for a tidbit and you get like a fucking, like, a ridiculous amount, which is, it's good.
Yeah. But so this is going to be fairly relentless. So bear with us here. But I'm gonna have a little swig of my tea because I can feel that my mouth's probably going to be relatively dry by the time I finish this essay.
I'm going to join you on a swig of water.
So the difference basically comes down to the wire gauge that is actually used in the construction of the pickup. So I'm going to scroll through my WhatsApp. Information courtesy of Craig Jackson at Axesrus. So you get two different types of wire gauge. You get AWG, which stands for American wire gauge, and you get SWG, which stands for standard wire gauge. The American wire gauge is imperial, so measurements based in inches. Standard wire gauge is metric, so based in millimetres. Pickups historically were built in America, so used AWG, and normally 42 and 43 means it's 0.0635mm and 0.057mm, respectively. As time moves on, AWG is pretty much extinct. In the real world, it's used for making small motors, and considering that's done primarily outside of the USA, gauge 42 and gauge 43 American wire gauge have been replaced with 46 and 47 standard wire gauge. The problem is they measure 0.6 and 0.05 millimetres diameter, respectively. Now, rest of electronics doesn't really matter, really. Whatever measurement you need from a motor, SWG will do the same job as AWG. It's just wire, innit? But pickups, it matters, because we're talking about a very familiar frequency range. The problem starts when you get cheap pickups, because SWG is miles cheaper, looks the same to the uneducated, but doesn't have the same frequency response. And in Korea, there's no such thing as the imperial system, so you get along more SWG coils nowadays, which never sound quite right. But yeah, SWG gets used to build cheap pickups, always sounds muddy and lacks the snap you traditionally get. But it's only true for gauge 42 versus 46. Not so much with gauge 43 versus 47. The difference isn't all that noticeable, and because we're working with tones that aren't that ingrained in the mindset, they can be all right. A 15K 43 gauge American wire gauge coil isn't going to sound like anything you've ever heard before, and neither a 15K 47 standard wire gauge coil. They're both new. They both sound different to each other, but neither sound like a Gibson Les Paul, so that's not wrong. They're just both different. It is wrong to wind an 8K coil to 46. Pretend it's 8K of 42. Yeah, sorry, so it's wrong to wind 8K of 46 standard and pretend it's 8K of 42 American wire gauge, because the 42 sounds like a Gibson Les Paul, because that's what Gibson did, and the 46 doesn't. So yeah, Strats, most tellies, most vintage humbuckers, most bass, all should be 42 gauge American wire gauge. But the cheap ones generally aren't. High output pickups, flip a coin. Some are 43 and some are 46. You've got such a small frame of reference as to what's good and what's not, that really both can be great. I generally like 43 on high output because it retains just a little bit more zip in the peak, but that's personal taste rather than something I'm questioning for because it's right in some historic sense. It is ultimately driven by historic consideration, but it's a bit of a deep topic. Is our guitar tone tastes based on something deeper math, or is it based on what we've heard before? No matter how far you depart from tradition, ultimately American wire gauge costs more because it's near extinct at the point and is only used for pickup winding now, so it doesn't get used for cheap guitars. And that's why a cheap Les Paul copy doesn't sound like a Gibson. But if you're chasing high gain, it doesn't really matter one jot.
Fucking hell. It explains a lot, though. It really, really does. It explains why a lot of people have this perceived kind of lowering of quality over guitars, like, as the years have gone by, and why people still think, like, Les Pauls, the old Les Pauls, are better. In reality, could it just be as simple as the wire gauge has changed?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure.
Absolutely. And I think that's basically what Craig is alluding to. And I think one of the interesting points that he makes is that, what are we basing our frame of reference for guitar tone on? Just because, something might sound different, but we go, oh, we don't like it. That doesn't sound like a Les Paul should sound to me. That doesn't sound like, this certain type of, guitar should sound like to me. You're basing it on historical references. So it's like a question of what's right or wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you say basing it off historical references, I think this is quite a difficult thing to capture anyway, because, I mean, what references have we got? I mean, you can listen back to a Guns N' Roses album back in the day, but you got no idea what they did to those guitars to make them sound like that anyway. It's like, True. I know Van Halen, he used a fucking Variac on his guitars. So how much of that is the guitar? How much of it is the processing is used? So it can be difficult, and I guess it's one of those things that if you've played an original Les Paul, you'll know what the difference is. But I think at that point, if you're a new guitarist, there's other ways to chase that tone. I mean, obviously with stuff like amp sims and stuff, or pedals. I mean, the type of pedals we can get today. So I guess it's one of those things that if you're a type of guy like me that just likes to plug straight into the amp and isn't really a pedal dude, I guess that kind of would be a really big thing. But to somebody I mean, Craig mentioned high gain and stuff. It wouldn't matter to somebody like that anyway, because they're probably going into something like an Axefx with like a fucking ridiculous amount of processing anyway. So I guess it's up to you.
Yeah, and it's a good point you make. You don't actually know what's been done to the guitars. I think a lot of the time it's about how something can feel as well. Sometimes you might record something back. I mean, like, obviously I record an alarming amount of pickups for my job, and it's amazing the amount of times where, like, I'll get two pickups that are, they're made out of different stuff, and you're recording like exactly the same piece of music. So you're doing what we call comparison tracks at Axesrus, and it feels different to play. So like my playing, I'm quite, I'm interacting with this pickup, and I'm probably making absolutely minuscule micro adjustments to my technique and whatever in order to get the best sort of sound out of the pickup. And it feels different, but then when you actually listen back to the two different products side by side, even if they were recorded in exactly the same guitar, like, a lot of the time, the difference is like unbelievably minimal, and the difference coming back on an oscilloscope and on a spectrum analyzer, isn't always particularly sort of telltale. So it's interesting. Pickups will change the sound of your guitar. I'm not saying that they won't, and yes, there is such a thing as a better pickup. But to round off the argument on pickups, all I would say is if you were thinking about replacing that part of your guitar, do it with purpose. Have an idea of what it is that you're actually searching for. You know, if you're looking for less gain, if you're looking to hit the front end of the amp cooler, go cooler. Make sure that, you know, it's the next product that you buy isn't as heavily wound. If you want more output, then yeah, go hotter. But do your research and don't buy just because, you know, Matt Bellamy plays it, or just because John Petrucci plays it, or because, you know, any of these other guitar players that you might aspire to. Because as you just correctly said, you have no idea what else is going on in that chain of events as well. Yeah,
true.
So I think we can move on from pickups. I think Craig's done us an absolute solid there, and hopefully has helped inform our viewers of what the difference is between wire gauges.
So I feel like he definitely went light on us in that instance of information, because that dude is one clever guy.
So that was Craig going light on us, by the way.
Yeah.
So next thing in the chain, you've come out of your pickups. You're going to be hitting a cable. Now, some people get quite fussy with their cables, don't they? Are you somebody who is particularly precious over what kind of cable you use?
Well, the thing is, I reckon at one point when I wasn't that experienced, I probably was. I mean, I have definitely bought an electric guitar cable next to an acoustic guitar cable. I have been one of those people that has definitely done that when I was younger. But now, I mean, everybody's done it. I mean, I don't care who you are. It's one of these things, you know, it's marketing, and it does get you when you're an amateur. It does.
Yeah,
but
completely.
Now, I build my own cables. I don't buy into them at all. I think it's a load of shit. As long as you've got the right gauge wire, you've shielded the cable's shielded properly or unshielded, or whatever your purpose is, and your connectors are good. And the connectors don't really have any effect on the sound. It's just quality. You know, get some good Neutrik connectors, because they know, you know it's not going to disintegrate in a week.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a tonal thing at that point. It's just a longevity thing.
Yeah, for me anyway, I just think it's a lot of fucking shit. I mean, what about you? I mean, are you one of these guys that buys electric guitar cables for metal? Or are you...
God, no.
You a pop cable guy?
No, I mean, I've grown out of all that shit a long time ago. Like you said, I think we all go through that phase, don't we, where, you know, if maybe back in the day, if I saw Steve Vai holding a signature Damasio cable or whatever that was some, like, you know, crazy colours, maybe I'd go, oh, wow, like, I'm going to go and buy that £100 cable. But nah, I'm not particularly fussed. I aren't as technically minded as you. You're like, you know, decent with a soldering iron, aren't you? And you can sort of, like, get your head around all this shit. No, you are, though. I mean, like, because I'm completely useless. So, like, anything, when it comes to fixing anything, repairing anything, modifying anything, I just don't even go there, you know. Like, I just go, Craig!
Well, don't get technologically minded crossed with the fact that I know how to use a soldering iron, because I ain't got a fucking clue with what I'm doing.
If you can, in my opinion, if you can use a soldering iron, then you are technically minded. That's where my limitation, like... I'm very, very aware of my limitations with that. But no, I guess that the only kind of criteria that I have is good connector, good quality end, and I try and keep my cable runs as short as I can, I guess.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't sit in here and record with a 100-foot long instrument cable. You know, it's pretty reasonable. I think the cable I use is like 5 meters. So it still does the job. I'm only in like a, you know, in a small sort of like tracking room space, so I'm not having to run ginormous cable runs through to different rooms. And like if I'm recording like with something like the Axe Effects, I have like really, really, really short cable runs coming out of the back. So I have two 30cm XLRs that I'll jack into the back of the interface with, and really that's about it. As long as I'm not getting any kind of like wacky interference or noise, I am not precious about cables. I mean, like, I think Craig made a point a few years ago, and he was just like, it's just fucking Kit Kat wrappers, in it.
He's right though. It really is. Like, I think it's crazy that people go out and buy these. I mean, this is going on to a whole different conversation, which I've probably touched on before, but like audiophiles and, you know, getting these cables that are fucking diamond tipped, fucking got diamond encrusted cock rings around them or whatever. Do you know what I mean? You don't fucking need it. It's like, oh, super fucking deep bass and crisp highs. Fuck off, mate. There's no fucking difference. I'm sorry, but there's no fucking difference.
You do get them though, don't you? I mean, like, you know, I've spoke to guitar players that have been like, oh yeah, I've been and got this, like, and I've spoken to people that have spent like over £100 on a cable. I can't help but be like, what the fuck? You know, like, why have you done that? Like, you're a maniac. So anyway, yeah, I think that gets our point across about cables. I mean, like, you know, don't take the piss. Don't go and buy like a Poundland cable that's going to like turn into a pile of shit after the second time you've used it. But at the same time, I don't think there's any need to go nuts. Just nice, solid, relatively short cable for the purpose of recording, I would say.
Yeah.
So, moving on in the chat, it's funny, I have to look at the whiteboard in order to sort of, like, remember what comes next.
I keep looking over as well, like, notes. Is my like, GoPro set on fire? No.
I mean, bearing in mind, like, we record guitars every day pretty much, and it's just like, what comes after the cable? It's like, I have to check the whiteboard, like, not like a set this gear up every day. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you do after, you know, where does your cable go? For me, personally, this is at the point where I'm running into a tuner.
Right. So...
Right. You're going to drop a bombshell, aren't you?
Yeah, no, because we always talk about this. We always talk about this, and you're like, no, I'm off into tuner. I'm like, no... I don't do it that way because I don't like, unless I'm doing amp sims, I don't use a tuner because the buffer from the tuner is really good with, especially like plug-in amp sims, you must run a buffer into them for it to work properly. Otherwise it sounds weird. I don't know the science behind that, but it's something to do on like Waves' page years ago. It literally tells you to do it. And I followed that information and I've noticed there is a big difference if you don't use a tuner. But
is this if you just using amp sims, yeah?
Yeah, if you're using like a plug-in amp sim, like you know, through your interface. If you don't use a buffer, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the impedance. I don't know what it does, but it sounds different. It doesn't sound as good. Like it just sounds a bit mushier without. And it literally tells you, if you actually read the instructions of most VST plugins, like amp sims, it fucking tells you to use a tuner, but nobody does it.
Interesting.
But anyway, when I'm recording real amps, I don't plug straight into a tuner at all. I go. Unless I'm using something else before the signal chain, I'll just go straight into the amp. And if I want to tune my guitar, I'll either tune it in Ableton or I'll pull it out and I'll tune it completely dry, you know, so it's not actually in my signal chain. Just because I just don't like it. I don't like the way it sounds. You
don't want it in your pack. You want to get rid of it out of the actual chain if you can.
Yeah, if I can, yeah.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. I can get on board with not having something that's absolutely necessary as part of the signal chain. What I will say is, before I kind of, I guess, explain a little bit about my processes, another one of my bugbears, to carry on my two major bugbears that I spoke about in the last episode, is, you know, if you are a recording guitar player, an aspiring recording guitar player, you know, or maybe you haven't done an awful lot of recording, but you're making an EP or an album, or you're recording a single or whatever, and you're relatively new to the recording game, honestly, tune your guitar in. I mean, there's a reason why guitars have tuning pegs, you know. The amount of people that I've seen just, like, you know, be completely blasé about their guitar, like, you know, not just like being relatively out of tune, but like quite out of tune in a recording session. And it's like, these things have got machine heads for a reason. Do you know what I mean? And it's because they go out of tune a lot, and that's why they're there. You know, you don't need to tune a piano in as often as you need to tune in a guitar, but that's why they're there. So like every take, at least every couple of takes, get that guitar back in tune, because it, you know, chances are it will have drifted ever so slightly. We live in a world now where, you know, we can drop in for tiny little sections of a take. It's all about multi-track recording, and it's all about making records that are specifically designed for repeated listening. So, like, do yourself a favour and get your fucking guitar in tune.
Yeah. Especially if, you know, you're sending it for us to mix, because, I mean, I think we covered this in the last episode, so I won't go over it again, but it's a fucking ball ache.
What, Melodyne in guitars?
Yeah, Melodyne. I mean, we did speak about this in the last episode. I remember.
Yeah, we did.
I remember talking about this. But, yeah, it's a fucking ball ache.
Yeah, completely agreed. I mean, and especially if it's like a distorted guitar track where it's like there's all harmonics and overtones, and it's completely dicking Melodyne around, and Melodyne's got no idea what note you're actually playing. It can be a nightmare. So yeah, I mean, it depends what I'm doing, actually. I mean, one of the main reasons I jack into a tuner, the Boss 2 U3, is it has got a good buffer on it, but also it's where I can split the signal. So if I am going to record dries, I'll split the signal coming out of the tuner. I'll go the output of the tuner I will send into either, the Axe effects, or I'll send it into a rail amplifier. And then the bypass I will take into a DI box, and then that's going to hit the interface if I'm recording dry guitar parts. How do you feel about recording dries? Do you have a mindset? Do you have a process?
Right, with recording dries, I mean, this for me is something that I don't normally do unless somebody asks for it, because I find it a bit, I don't know, it's splitting my signal. I always think it's taken away from my other signal, especially going in like dry straight into the amp. So if somebody wants dries, I'm normally thinking they're doing metal music, so I'd probably use something, a bit more of a higher gain sound, so you can probably get away with it. But if I'm doing something else and I'm using like the AC or using the Fender, I'll be like, look, you're not getting a dry signal. You can have the signal before the amp, the cab sim, because I normally use cab sims with these kind of things. But I just won't do it. And if I am doing it, I'll use it obviously like a DI box. I think my my whammy, which I use pretty much for everything, that has a dry signal output. I think it's buffered, and I think it sounds shit. So I don't really do it, to be quite honest.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's not something that I like to do, I must admit. It's something that every now and then people have asked me to provide. It's always a laugh listening back to like an absolutely screaming, shredding guitar solo back, and when you listen to the dry take, and it just makes you sound like an absolute pile of shit. Especially where you've got like whipped, dived harmonics. It's supposed to be like woo, but it's just like, but like on the dry, it just sounds terrible. But yeah, I don't like to do it, and the reason is I think it sort of alludes back to something that I mentioned earlier on. Guitar players are incredibly interactive with the tone that they track with. You are constantly making tiny little adjustments to the way that you're playing, based on the feedback that you're getting from the speakers, based on the feedback that you're getting from the amplifier. When I've ever tried to reamp something, which I've done plenty of times, it's just never come back feeling right. I can never get that. The thing that I think I can get, I never can seem to get it, you know what I mean? Like, maybe this is something that is a bit of an area for development, really. If there's anybody that does have experience sort of like reamping and sort of using dry signals, drop us a comment, because I'd like to know what your process is, if you've got like a solid process that you're really, really happy with.
Yeah, I mean, reamping, I found it works really well with clean guitars, like if they're doing like a clean part. Because you can put I normally run it through the AC and it sounds fucking great. But if somebody's doing a thing where it's slightly distorted, but because like you said, you react to that distortion. Like if you're doing a bit where it's supposed to build up and the crunch is supposed to build up, you're reacting to when what you've played it on, the crunch is building up. It doesn't work with another amp, and with metal, it always just seems to sound weird. Like, I don't know, it sounds okay, but it never quite gets it quite as good as it does when you're actually playing it. So yeah, I definitely have to agree with you on that. Yeah,
I must admit, I think like I don't capture it, because I always used to take like a dry feed when I first sort of like learned a lot about this stuff. It was always like a sort of backup plan, like a contingency plan. Oh, make sure I've got a dry just in case I decide I want to reamp at a later date. And then I think as I got a little bit more confident and probably like a lot more competent with recording and knowing what kind of tones I want to sort of like commit to record, I just stopped bothering, because it was just like, nah, I like this sound. What I will do is I will sort of like, especially if you're using things like cab sims, if I'm tracking the rail amp, obviously this needs to be running through like an IR if I'm not going to record the cabinet. Yeah. More often than not, I will be using IRs. But like, I can generally shape the sound to something more in line with what I want in terms of frequency response by messing around with an IR after the fact. I've had much better luck doing that than I have trying to sort of reamp.
I think as well, IRs, I know a lot of people probably won't agree with this, but I think a good IR is the make or break between a great guitar tone. Like, you can use an amp sim from 2006, but if you put a shit cab sim on it, you can normally save it, which is really surprising. I remember when Cali first came out, and everybody was realising that all these old amp sims that they had that they never wanted to use anymore because they were shit were now usable because these cabs were so well done.
Completely.
So yeah, I think obviously you need to make sure you got your tone dialed in right on your amp first, but it really can elevate it. So it is a good idea to give somebody a copy of the guitars without the cab sim on. Yeah, because especially if it's a production and not a mix, the mix engineer, if it's not working, because obviously that mix engineer doesn't know your mindset. They might mix guitars really heavy or really light compared to you, and they might think, right, this guitar tone's far too heavy or far too light. Yeah, you give them that option, giving them a clean tone. It's not. They've got to then reamp it, try and find that. It's a fucking bollock for everybody involved. So yeah.
Well, I think we should not blow our load talking about things like Cali and different IRs right now, because that is definitely one for another day when we finish off talking about the last part of the signal chain in the next episode.
Yeah.
So I think we can round things off there. I think that's a nice sort of point to go, right, this is the middle end of the chain. And obviously next time we're going to be looking at things like real amplifiers, amp sims, we've got like modelling equipment that we can talk about these days. Are we recording real cabs? Are we using IRs? You know what I mean? That's a completely different journey, I think. So as always, guys, any questions, drop us a comment, speak to us. If you like what you're watching, hit the subscribe button. Don't be shy. So
I've got a thing to add to that. On our analytics, only 48% of people that watch this video are subscribed. So there's
is that right?
The rest of you. Yeah, it's true. So the rest of you aren't subscribed. So stop being a lazy bastard and subscribe.
Get fucking subscribed.
Be on your grind.